Hello everybody, my name is Walnut and today I'm going to talk about the community feedback for September 4th, the 2015 year of the whatever. So they're just, the whole intro, everything's cool, talking about the beta and stuff like that. Game is too easy or too difficult due to macro changes discussion. We've heard discussions on both sides of this topic. Our perspective so far is that we think there's still plenty of both micro and macro mastery needed in StarCraft 2. Freeing up some clicks per race does look to be a good direction to go. While we hear some pro players saying things like macro is so easy that everyone's macro will be equal now, we highly doubt that they will be playing at the highest possible skill level due to these changes. Further, we're definitely not seeing perfect macro from any of the three races right now. Last weekend, we looked at pro-level players competitively playing Archon mode, and we were able to point out plenty of the players' mistakes in terms of macro, micro delayed reaction times, yada yada yada. So essentially, they're saying stop fucking whining. We're just like, this is the early phase of the test. Like, things are going to change. Things aren't too hard. Things aren't too easy. That's essentially what they're saying with this. It's just a giant please stop whining, this change came out like 2 weeks ago type thing. Then they talk about the adept. Like, mainly the rest of this is going to be unit based changes, but they start off with the adept. They say we've tried various upgrades for the adept. They want a more straightforward upgrade for the unit. It's already pushing it in terms of complexity, and they don't want a health upgrade on an already tanky unit. This I can agree with, because the adept is really, really tanky, and I don't think it should be. We'll most likely try out a different simple stat upgrade for the unit's upgrade slot soon. This seems kind of... okay, in a way I don't like this, but in another way I do. In one way I don't like it because it's another thing on the Twilight Council that we have to research along with Charge and Blink. But on the other hand, this is exactly what I asked for Protoss units, in that they get late game upgrades that keep them relevant. And I think that's like really, really important for a lot of units in general, really. If you think about it, things like Zerglings have adrenal glands, Roaches have like burrow move, obviously like Zealots have charge and stuff like that. It's not like... it shouldn't be something that's mandatory that you have to get for the unit to be useful. And I think that's kind of what charge is right now, where Zealots are fucking horrendous if you don't have charge, right? Zealots fucking suck if you don't have charge. But on the other hand, if you have a unit like the Stalker, isn't a great unit, but it's still good even without Blink, right? Like, you can still do things with Stalkers. You can still have them as a core unit in your army if you don't have Blink. But it's an ability that allows the Stalker to... and I won't even be talking micro potential here. It adds more micro potential, sure. But it's an ability that allows the unit to stay relevant later in the game once higher tier units start getting out. And I think that's really, really essential. It still doesn't, like, make the unit perfect, and it doesn't make them trade equally with everything else that's high tier, but it makes them relevant. They're not completely useless. I don't like the idea of charge where it's like an upgrade you have to get, and that's what adept shields felt like to me. It felt like you had to get adept shields, or else adepts were kind of like not nearly as good as they should be for that like portion in the game. But if they get like a stat upgrade, like, I think a good upgrade for adepts would probably be like attack speed. Because right now, they have one of the slowest attack speeds in the game, and that's like one of the reasons they fall off so heavily late game, is because, yeah, they can 2-shot workers and like 3-shot hydras and 2-shot marines, but how long does it take to get those 2 shots out, right? And since their damage only scales by, I believe, 1 or 2 with upgrades, they're not really gaining a whole lot percentage-wise from each upgrade, so they scale absolutely terribly with +3 upgrades. They're very, very strong in the early game, but they're essentially fucking garbage in the late game. Anyway, moving on. Separate from the Adept upgrade, we wanted to discuss one additional topic for the Adept. Currently, there's an issue where Adepts are very difficult to counter with Tier 1 to Tier 2 units on Protoss. Yeah, I mean, the only way to counter Adepts is with other Adepts right now, unless you go, like, you defend really heavily, and then go up to Robo and get out Disruptors really fast, because Disruptors kind of wreck Adept. But yeah, it's kind of turning into the Blink Stalker situation where there's only one unit that counters the other unit efficiently, and like is a unit that you can get out fast enough. So like that's kind of a problem, but that's the same thing as Ling Bane or like Marine Siege Tank, right? Like there's going to be one like quote unquote best unit in the matchup, right? There's going to be one best composition considering it's a mirror matchup, and there's always going to be a situation where there's like the only way to counter a composition is by using the same composition. That's just how mirror matchups work. We didn't always have to deal with that before in PvP, but we certainly have to now, and I think it's something that Protoss players are just going to have to get used to. There's also another potential issue of early game Terran Bio not having a solid counter to Adepts, since Adepts counter Marines in the early game and Marauders only soft counter the Adept. This I actually don't agree with, to be honest. If you're going a mass Adept rush, I can see how this would be a problem for Terran players, but if you're just doing light Adept harass, there's obviously good ways to deal with it as Terran. But like with things like the Widowmine and the Hellbat coming out so early, and those are things that you would get with a bio army too. Like not necessarily all the time, but it's something that Terran players are going to have to experiment with, right? Biomine was huge in Heart of the Swarm, and I haven't seen very many Widowmines at all in Legacy, to be honest. It's like one Widowmine drop at the beginning of the game and then never again. And I think like Widowmines do bonus damage. They do double damage to shielded units, if I'm not mistaken. They do 40 on hit and then... No, it's got to be more than that because it one-shots a Stalker. It does 40 extra damage though to shielded units. So the Adept shield upgrade is essentially entirely negated if you get one shot with a Widowmine and it's in a splash radius. So it's like a minor EMP that also like immediately kills whatever it hits first. So like Widowmines I feel like should be experimented with. Early Ghosts I think are really, really good against Adepts too, because I believe they do extra damage against Adepts, and they also have EMP to strip the shields. So like again, it's just, I feel like it's just things Terrans need to experiment with more than anything, rather than Adepts just being too strong. I've met my fair share of very stubborn Terrans on the ladder. I played a guy just the other day who only built Liberators and Siege Tanks, and then got mad at me when I walked directly on top of his Siege Tanks, and his Siege Tanks weren't able to shoot. Like, it's not my fault that you didn't build any units, right? Like, you need to have the counter to the units that I have. You can't just build naked Siege Tanks, and you can't just build naked bio against Adepts, right? You need to have Widowmines, you should have like Hellbats. Hellbats do so much damage against Adepts, especially with Blue Flame, because Adepts are a ranged unit, so they bunch up really bad. I don't know, I'm just throwing around ideas. But like these are things that I have not seen experimented with, but probably should be. Anyway, moving on. Here we're testing a version of the Adept that's armored instead of light. I have a problem with this. They're only looking at PvT, and they need to not be looking at only PvT. Right now, the main composition that you go against Lurkers in PvZ consists of Zealot, Sentry, Disruptor, Immortal, and Adept. And the reason you go this composition is because all of the units are either light or very tanky in the case of the Immortal, or really long range in the case of the Disruptor. But you cannot go armored units against the Lurker because it just does so much damage to armored units. I'm actually going to have to fact check myself on this one, and I'll put it in as like a note later in the video or something. I don't know, it'll be somewhere on the screen. I'm pretty sure the Lurker does 20 damage to all units and then 30 damage to armored units, but it might be 30 to all. But essentially, like, you don't want armored units against Lurkers. I know that for a fact. Generally, it's you don't want Stalkers, but it's kind of armored units in general. You don't really want Colossus because they just kind of evaporate. I don't know. Really, you want to keep your Immortal count low too. It's just Disruptors and then light gateway units. But I think like changing it to armored is going to change a lot more things than just early game PvT. And I think they're not really considering that, and it bothers me a little because I don't think this is a good change. I think it's going to fix, or I think it's going to break more interactions than it will fix. There's things like Don't roaches do extra damage? Or think like what if you're dropping adepts, right? I'm pretty sure queens don't do bonus damage to armored. I'm pretty sure like lings don't do bonus damage to armors. Armored. Hellions would be really bad against adept harass now, where right now they're honestly pretty decent. Things like siege tanks would, I think, do more damage to adepts now, which is maybe not a good thing. Do liberators do bonus damage to armored? I don't know. Anyway, it's just like it would change so many interactions that I feel like it honestly would just break a lot more things than it would fix. I think the real like issue with the adept right now is that it's not a standard unit. And this is something that a lot of people seem to be completely forgetting about the unit, is that despite it being a core army unit, it is not a standard unit because it does not fire quickly with a fairly medium damage output. Like, let me pull up any example of a unit that that's like T1, T2 from any race. There's the Stalker, the Zealot, the Roach, the Hydralisk, the Zergling, the Marine, the Marauder. All of them attack fairly quickly with like low levels of damage or medium levels of damage, right? The Adept attacks a lot like a late game unit. It does a ton of damage, but it attacks very, very slowly. And in low unit counts and low upgrade situations, this leads to the Adept doing absolutely fantastically against any unit that it counters. It absolutely annihilates any unit that it counters. But on the other hand, if you're in the late game with high upgrades and lots of units, the Adept underperforms really heavily because it doesn't scale well with upgrades. It attacks so slowly that it doesn't contribute nearly as much as it needs to in like high unit count engagements. It's a unit that's too strong early and too weak late game. And I like the idea that it's supposed to be like a harassing unit and a scouting unit and kind of a core army unit, and I like that they're being unique with it and that it attacks slow and does a lot of damage. But I think at the end of the day, in order to equalize this unit and give it balance and make it relevant throughout the entire game, they're probably just going to have to change the unit to be more standard like everything else. Otherwise, it's going to be a bitch and a half to balance because it's always going to have that same problem of scaling terribly with upgrades. Now, I'm not saying this is the change that needs to happen or like I like need this or I'm going to quit the game or whatever. I'm just saying that like if they want it to not be extremely strong early game and not be really weak late game, they need to normalize the damage. That's one of the only solutions. That or give it like I said before, like an attack speed upgrade late game or just something like that. But there's not a whole lot of other ways, right? There's not a whole lot of other ways to equalize a unit that interacts like that. Anyway, the Corruptor, they essentially say the Corruptor overlaps with the Swarm Host because there's both supposed to be sniping town hall structures, which is kind of weird. They don't want it to be like the exact same as the Swarm Host, so they're testing a version where the Corruptor can use the ability on ground units. And I thought this was how it functioned already. I thought it did damage to ground units, but I guess I was wrong. Because that's how it was when they announced like the alpha of the game. It was like they used it on a siege tank, if I remember correctly. And it's cool. Like it just gives Corruptors some use after they've run out of air targets to shoot. It's whatever. There's not a whole lot to talk about. The Corruptor is a very fundamental unit. It's a lot like the Void Ray or the Marine or the Marauder, where it's one of those things you just have attack things. But it's not as useful as either of those because it can only attack air units. So they're just sort of giving it a little bit more strength, which is completely fine. The Corruptor is a little bit, I would say it's one of the weaker air options. Overlord drops moving to lair. We heard the feedback that it's too big a nerf. And the person in the fancy suit pointed out. I don't know what that's like a reference to. We will test some different ways to potentially get this changed to a better place. I think like something arbitrary like a Roach Warren requirement or something like that would probably be good, or like an Evo Chamber requirement, because then it's available on Hatchery, but it's also a commitment. That I don't know. Like, I don't really have any strong feelings one way or the other because I can't. I haven't seen Overlord drop used that much, and it hasn't been used very much versus me. Roach drops in the early game can be absolutely devastating, but most Zergling drops aren't really that big of a deal from my experience. But again, like, I haven't played versus it very often, so it's like it's hard for me to have a very strong opinion on it. Roach Burrow move speed, essentially this like whole paragraph is just saying that they're going to nerf the move speed of roaches. And I think this is fair, because one of the things about Roach Burrow is that there's almost no counterplay to it, right? They burrow and you can't force field them out. You can't really walk away because they're too fast. You can't like force them to unburrow. You can't like there's nothing you can do other than say maybe like recall out to prevent the Zerg from walking right on top of your army with Roach Burrow. And I think that's, I don't know, it just got a little bit overwhelming with players that were very, very good at manipulating Roach Burrow. But again, it's not one of those things I've seen super often. It used to be very popular back when, like, right after Ravagers got nerfed, and even a little bit before they did, because Roach compositions were so popular. But right now, all it is Roach Hydra Lurker. That's all I've seen for the past, like, 3 or 4 weeks. And it, to be honest, it's getting a little old, but we'll talk about that later, probably in a different video. But not, again, like, it hasn't been used all that much, and the last time it was used, Protoss was really fucking weak, so I can't really have a strong opinion on this. Cyclone damage, we agree with the general feedback that damage is really weak, so they're giving it a plus armored focus so that not all air units are countered easily. I think this is the right way to buff damage, to be honest, because it's not saying like the Cyclone is immediately super strong against everything. Now it's good against things like Void Rays or Brood Lords or Carriers or Battle Cruisers or whatever, but it's not like the best unit in the game against like Mutas or Phoenix or things like that. And I don't know, it adds like a little bit more niche to the unit where it's not necessarily just good at everything. And I think the Cyclone suffers from that a lot, where it's good at everything, but unlike the Stalker, it's not all like jack of all trades, master of none, not master of all. Is essentially how I like to describe the differences between the Stalker and the Cyclone. Liberator strength, we believe this is mostly a timing thing. I don't. I think it does too much damage, the air-to-ground mode, to be honest. I think two-shotting Stalkers is a little bit too much. Like, I feel like it's not one of those counterplay things, right? Like, there's counterplay to an extent, like you can blink around the zone, or you can like use Tempests or whatever, but it's one of those things where once that zone is up, there's not a whole lot you can do to exploit the unit, right? You either have to kill it before the zone comes up, or you have to not be in that area anymore because it does so much damage. So it's like one of those zoning things that either it doesn't necessarily win you the fight in terms of like doing all the damage, but it wins you the fight in that the not the Protoss player, but the opponent doesn't really have anywhere left to go. There's been situations where like I've been at my 4th base and I literally can't leave because there's nowhere not covered by a Liberator zone, and that gets like incredibly frustrating. In all honesty, I would love to see either a damage nerf or the radius of the zone decreased a little bit, because like, again, I don't play against this super often because there aren't a whole lot of Terrans in beta right now or that are playing, but honestly, like, it feels like you can get a little bit too much out of just a couple of Liberators, and it's especially annoying against like Liberator Siege Tank, where it's like you can't blink under without losing all your Stalkers, and you can't like run through because of losing all your Stalkers. I don't know, it's just like it's this annoying situation where there's like one way to deal with it, but to get to that like optimal composition is incredibly difficult, especially when dealing with like Hellbat Harass on top of that. I don't know, it's just Liberators do feel too strong, but I don't think adding in an upgrade and making it a timing thing is necessarily the right way to go. I think it's more of like the unit is simply doing too much. But again, I could be wrong. These are only my opinions. So yeah, that brings us to the end of our community feedback update. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. My name is Walnut. Be sure to follow me on YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter, and comment in the comment section below with your thoughts on the balance, or not the balance patch. Well, yeah, the balance patch and these community feedbacks, as well as your thoughts on my thoughts. And I will see you guys next time.